So, evolutionary psychology is just an approach to psychology. We are interested in the information processing circuitry of the mind. So, we're all familiar with hardware and software. Hardware, you pick up your cell phone, you have the hardware, and then you can download all the apps. And the question evolutionary psychologists try to answer is what kind of mental apps evolution built into our operating system, the human operating system. And to answer that question, we think about all of the problems we had to face over evolutionary time and how evolution might have tinkered with circuitry to solve those problems. And so it requires thinking about what the past might have been like, the problems we would have faced as hunter-gatherers, and then possible solutions, kind of software solutions to that.
Dr. Debra Lieberman, what is the journey that you've been on that's brought you to where you are today in the work that you do?
I'm currently a professor at the University of Miami in the Department of Psychology. I'm an evolutionary psychologist, and I guess I'll get to what that is in just a second. But I never, ever thought about becoming a professor. I started out thinking about medical school. And so I was off to be a neurosurgeon. And it was only until university that I took a class with David Sloan Wilson, who is a well-known biologist in the States. He taught a class called Evolution and Human Behaviour. And I thought it was really fascinating in the biology department to be talking about humans and how they evolved. And then I was curious because no other biologist would talk about humans, and no psychologist or anthropologist at my university would talk about evolution. So I was like, this is really weird. So first, professors don't all agree about what's true. That was the first awakening. And so then I decided there seemed like a really good fight to be fought, and I wanted in. So I decided that it wasn't really about money for me. It was about trying to be an effective teacher and researcher. So I applied to grad school and went to one place that I thought I could learn this stuff, which was Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, at the Center for Evolutionary Psychology, where two of the founders of the field were, and were doing a lot of good work. And so that's where I found myself, out in Santa Barbara, California, for a few years. Fast forward to today, now I'm a professor in evolutionary psychology at Miami. It's been a very fun journey.
That's awesome. And I don't think I've had an Eve psychologist on the show yet. So for those that are novices, could you give us like the 5,000 foot meta of the kind of whole sphere?
Absolutely. So evolutionary psychology is just an approach to psychology. We are interested in the information processing circuitry of the mind. So we're all familiar with hardware and software. So hardware, you pick up your cell phone, you have the hardware, and then you can download all the apps. And the question evolutionary psychologists try to answer is what kind of mental apps evolution built into our operating system, the human operating system. And to answer that question, we think about all of the problems we had to face over evolutionary time and how evolution might have tinkered with circuitry to solve those problems. And so it requires thinking about what the past might have been like, the problems we would have faced as hunter-gatherers, and then possible solutions, kind of software solutions to that. But one of the features that evolutionary psychologists like to think about is what kind of information kind of comes native in the system. Like, the system has to come prepared in a certain way, just like the apps on your phone come prepared. Your calendar comes prepared to accept information about dates and times and places. Your phone comes prepared to kind of collect information about people and numbers and addresses. And so our mind comes prepared to accept certain pieces of information from the surrounding social cultural environment. And the question is, what does it come native with? And then what information is required in order for these systems to operate and function? So typically people think, oh, it's genetic determinism. Not at all. You don't get anything for free, and no block of wood is going to learn something by virtue of talking to it. things need programming. The question is, what kind of programming in order to generate the flexible behavior that we see? So evolutionary psychologists are interested in relationships, emotions, morality, decision-making, groups. And so we try to study the whole range of things.
You touched on there saying what we come prepared with. What do you think the nature versus nurture thing, like in terms of what have you learned recently that is new in that?
So the nature-nurture debates are really interesting. And there's actually two different fields that address that topic differently. So evolutionary psychology is more interested in what are the universal features that all humans share that allow all humans, for instance, to learn a language. And so we all have the information, the kind of processing circuitry to grab language and pieces of information from our cultural environment to allow us to learn a language. Then there's behavioral genetics, which is interested in answering a very different kind of different question that has to do with to what extent are differences between groups due to the variations between their genes versus environment. And that's the discipline that focuses on do you find that particular gene sequences are responsible uh, for for explaining differences between groups in different traits. That's not evolutionary psychology. So the nature nurture debate, evolutionary psychologists, it's both. It's both. So my particular area of study where I started was kinship. And all humans, in fact, a lot of other animals as well, have in their brain a area that processes information that allows us to infer who is and who is not a close genetic relative. This operates even outside of language. So other animals, let me take other animals just as the example. So other animals don't have language. They don't have their mom saying, be nice to your siblings in the litter, and so forth. They use cues that correlated with individuals being a close genetic relative over that species' evolutionary history. And we care about close genetic relatives because it's important, because one of the main kind of theories in evolutionary biology talks about how altruism can evolve when it's directed towards individuals who share genes in common. And so altruism very much follows the lines of genetic relatedness. But if that's true, you have to know, well, who's related to me in order to know who to be nice to. And so other animals figure out who their genetic relatives are based on these kinship cues. So is it people who smell like me? Is it the individuals who I'm raised with? Is it the, individuals who nursed from the same female and so forth? So there's a variety of cues that would have picked apart and identified close genetic relatives. Humans, it ends up, also use very similar sorts of cues. And this is kind of built in the sense of we have circuitry that's monitoring and sweeping the social environment for these cues. And anytime it's detected, it kind of registers as, oh, there's an increased likelihood this person might be a close genetic relative. So childhood co-residence is one cue. So if you're being cared for during childhood by the same mom and dad, chances are that the person that you're being kind of reared with and cared for by the same two people, it's a good chance that that particular person is a sibling. And so your brain registers that, increases the certainty that they're a sibling, and then regulates the desire to help out and feel obligated towards and so forth. So on one hand, the circuitry has to be kind of the nature part, but the nurture part, you have to have the cues available. And if you have misleading cues, then you're going to get misleading information. So there's cultures and cultural institutions, for instance, the Israeli kibbutz, where you had children who were not related, who were raised together, and their brain kind of mapped and categorized these non-relatives as relatives. So the nature is working, right? But the information kind of coming in is saying something a little bit different. So it's taking in information that now isn't correlated with genetic relatedness in that particular culture. So that leads to the development of greater altruism and less likelihood of marrying a child that you were raised with on the kibbutz.
What about, is there a cutoff in terms of um age, in terms of, because I'm thinking about step siblings, and if you were step siblings from 1 versus 16, that's going to be quite different.
It's a great question. And so, I mean, there's so much we don't know about this system. This is really just the beginning, the trailhead of this question. And so, uh, what really matters is the diagnostic cues of kinship would really have boiled down to, who do I see my parents investing in? Right? So if I have accurately categorized my mom as mom, and ancestrally that would have been a pretty secure, sure bet. The woman who's breastfeeding me and mom would know that I'm hers because I fell out of her, so she gave birth to me. And so as soon as I correctly identify mom, perhaps also dad, but certainly mom, then any other child she's investing in, pregnant and births or breastfeeds, or otherwise older and cares for and tends to when they're sick or they're in trouble and so forth. That's what I'm tracking. And so it's possible that depending on when stepchildren come into the family, that might also be used as information of, more likely a relative and so forth, especially if you're the younger child, right? So if you're the younger child and there's an older stepchild and you're just born, that step sibling might in fact look and mirror a biological sibling in many ways to their mind.
Yeah, that's interesting. And potentially a bit of a mismatch if that was the case. If I mean, I've got younger stepbrother, 2 younger stepbrothers, and I'm trying to work out the age difference now. I would have been like, the youngest would have been about 6, I would have been 18. So, you know, whether he will look at me different, I suppose he probably does, because he was so young and the brain wasn't developed. I don't know. What would your research point to there?
Well, I think it all matters. So it's possible there's very interesting shades of gray. It's not like a black and
Mm,
white, relative, non-relative. There's going to be degrees of certainty. But so he's not a sibling, right? So you have this idea, but I don't mean explicit no. I mean like as in that your mom did not birth this child kind of
sure.
thing. So
Yeah.
but so that certainty in your mind might be your that kind of estimate of relatedness in your mind might be more certain. His might be
Mm,
less certain, meaning that you might feel more sibling-esque than other people do, for instance. Um,
mm,
and so it's a really good question. So I'm engaged in a very large scale study to start to answer some of these very specific questions about the patterns of different families. Because in order to study this, you have to collect all the kind of current patterns of variation and see how that maps onto how people feel about their siblings. So it can't just be, I was born and my sibling was 3 years old and we lived together for 15 years. And so I got two perspectives, the older one and the younger one. No, you've got, some kids are born and then they have older siblings of variety of ages. Some are actually related, some are adopted, some are half, some are step. And so being able to collect all of the different permutations in enough numbers in order to kind of to better examine the system is what's needed. But you can imagine how large scale that study is.
mm. Yeah, there's so many trains of thought on this point. Like, I was thinking then, as soon as I mentioned, I think, did I say I had
Yeah.
two younger stepbrothers? Actually, I have 4, but the other 2 are much more recent because my mum only just got married recently, and I wasn't. We've never lived in the same home. So even though I was much older when I lived with my other stepbrothers for a little while, I did live with them. So that's interesting there, how I kind of view the 2, where I, just naturally, I suppose I see them closer, like more kin. than the newer, older ones that I've not lived under the same roof as.
Naturally, I mean, if I can relate a story that didn't occur because of my interaction, but a colleague of mine was called by a psychologist, a therapist, a clinician who was seeing a patient who was engaged in cutting behavior, and
What? Sorry,
this
cutting. What? Oh,
cutting
literal
cutting
cutting.
cutting
Right. Sorry.
behavior, so kind of self harm,
Yeah.
and uh, out of guilt and possible shame of the way that she felt toward a particular sibling in the family, like she didn't treat another sibling as well. It ends up that this therapist had read our paper on kinship and thought maybe there was something there that could help their client to understand maybe what was going on internally and psychologically that led to different kinds of feelings towards different types of siblings in the family. And indeed, a very short conversation revealed that the patient felt guilty about not treating one sibling as well as the others, and that was because of this maybe reduced relatedness. So again, coming to the family later, so feeling closer to others, maybe doing more for others that she felt more related to, and feeling guilty for maybe not helping or feeling a certain way. Felt guilty for not kind of feeling a certain way towards another sibling who more recently came to the family, who she didn't have as great a certainty was a relative. And I guess upon the therapist talking to their client about it, the cutting behavior subsided, which was, I mean, this is one story, but it's nice to at least provide into people with an explanation as to why they might be feeling the way that they're feeling, based on these evolved systems.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it's really beautiful actually, because I have a question around practical applications, and
Mhm.
that's a perfect example there. If you're a long-term listener of the podcast, this won't be the first time you've heard me talk about habits and leveraging public accountability. That's why I created InDeep, the tool that helps you build healthy habits and stick to them. I'm giving away 100 free VIP months to my podcast listeners. There's no credit card required. Head to indeep.com/podcast. That's deep with two I's, INDIIP.com/podcast, or follow the links in the episode description below. Let's start crushing our habits today. What about other areas of your work, or we can stay on this in terms of how it's been able to map over to application and help people?
Well, so I think that one of the areas where I see evolutionary psychology, well, there's a few, but one of the ones I'm more interested in right now is what's going on with social media. And so the psychologist Jonathan Haidt talks about kind of the anxious generation. And I think that an understanding of evolutionary psychology and what emotions are and what they're doing and the strings that they pull in the mind might very much be important to the current generation who has their social interactions magnified on social media. And so social media is a place where, emotions, sure, like joy and pride and all these things can certainly occur, but more often than not, shame, fear, guilt, and those are very powerful. I mean, those are really powerful for very good reasons. But in the environment of social media, they can be very destructive and extremely harmful. And so I think that that's exactly one place where the application of kind of the evolutionary psychology of emotions can very much be helpful to understand, well, what is shame? What is guilt? What is pride? Why do people seek attention? What's really going on here? So all of this is modern, yes, but it rides atop a evolved psychology that's there, that's generating all of this. I mean, we have a thirst and a taste to be known and recognized for our accomplishments. And so, kind of understanding why one would feel shame. And it's very easy. It's very easy for, a bunch of people to say even the slight comments, and that would make people feel shameful. People don't even need to say anything in order to trigger shame.
Just
And
not saying
so,
something.
yes, it's not what's
Oh, they
said.
didn't. They
It's
didn't comment.
yes. Are they ignoring me intentionally? Is this, but meanwhile they're like, out, with their family. It's the signal to noise ratio is just off when it comes to social media. Normally you're in front of someone, whether they understand. You get immediate feedback as to
Uh,
their reaction to your behavior or your words. But in social media, you don't get any of that feedback. And so we're left to wonder. And so that uncertainty is something that can spiral out of control.
mm, I feel like you know social media is kind of like I call it like knockoff connection, like rip-off connection, secondhand connection, in that it when you have been starved of physical connection, it can feel kind of similar. And I feel like it is not until I experience real connection that I go, oh, that other stuff, like that really isn't, that's not the thing. It's so synthetic. Um, and, you know, last night actually I went round to my parents, my dad's house, and I'd spent a lot of time recently. I work from home a lot. Always behind the computer or doing something. I live alone. A lot of, and I'm always posting stuff on Instagram and whatnot. And then we'd had dinner, we'd sat down, relaxing, and then all of a sudden I was like, and I'd forgotten how like real connection actually feels. And I go, "Oh, it's this. Like this is the feeling." And you can just get so used to, um I think the dopamine that you get from social media becomes like a Band-Aid. If you are feeling maybe not totally fulfilled or whatever, but then someone's liking your post or whatever, and then it distracts you, and then you've got Netflix, and it's so it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, actually. So it's interesting that you mentioned social media. What do you think, other than the obvious things, what do you think are some of the sort of like these silent assassins when it comes to social media that people maybe not be like totally cognizant of?
How do you mean silent
So,
assassins?
in terms of something that's maybe a little bit underhand and not totally obvious, we all know the obvious issues with social media, social comparison, etc. Is there anything that you think is around shame, guilt, pride, or whatever? Is there anything there that people maybe would not think of?
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, look, we evolved to have a very, very deep thirst to be recognized for our value, for the kind of the unique traits that we bring to the table, our social portfolio, right? And so that's all we're really looking for, people who value us, because having someone ancestrally who was there for us beyond family members, who cared for our well-being, who cared for us when we're sick or when we're being targeted. These are the folks that would have been really important. And so having friends was really important. How do you have friends? You have to cultivate value, or you're going to be a dominant kind of person and scare everyone into caring for you. But most of us try to cultivate friends and leverage the qualities that we have that are unique. And social media is this whole entire environment where you get to kind of display, like, look at me, look at me, look at me now, and,
Mm.
value me. So I would say, one of the hidden things is, when you're going on, you open the app or you're about to post, questioning you know, kind of doing an internal diagnostic check, like, how am I doing? Do I feel lonely? Do I feel like I need to be valued? Do I think that that type of value is really going to come from this external thumbs up kind of liking and how many people comment? Um, and the answer is no, only because it doesn't matter how many thumbs up or comments you get. Those are all, each of them together, they might look like something. It's a big fire hose of nothing, but at the same time, each one is so uncertain that it will leave you worse off potentially than when you started. So I would say, I mean, at least what I talk about in my classes is the concept of social value. We're always interested in, do you value me? And kind of getting the signals of that. And like you said, when you're in front of people, you're actually in a social interaction, you can understand very quickly with great certainty and accuracy whether someone values you. And that certainty is a that feels good, in a sense. I mean, even the, clarifying of, "Oh, they really don't
Mhm.
care about me." It's like, okay, like, even that's clarifying and can feel very good. But being around people who genuinely do care about you, and who are reliably do, I think, it feels very different, and it will always feel very different than these online kind of proxy, situations.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That uncertainty element, the it's almost the silent majority of social media, and if you're not careful, like things like story views, like that's a complete head fuck. They introduce story views, and then like that's a thing, and I'm like, why am I looking at who's looking? Like, and then you'll end up thinking, oh well, that person's not said anything. Like, it must be because they don't like me, or it must be X. And like you say, but then you see them in real life, and it's and then you have things where they go, oh yeah, how's that thing going or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know you knew that, because they're kind of like the silent ones that don't really say anything, and then that's strange, to be kind of. I mean, you're like in the public eye as well, like having people knowing stuff about you, but that you've not been a part of that conversation, you know.
That Luckily, that has not happened to me. I appreciate you telling me I'm in the public eye, but, I think um, that would be weird for sure.
Mm,
So, do you think that people who do podcasts and interview other people are like constantly like, how many people have checked me out? Like how many people, how many comments, how many this, how many that? Is that something that you think people in your field do very often? And if so, like, is that is that a good thing to do? Like, I guess what I'm saying is, you want to talk to the people and have a conversation with people. And then that conversation goes out to whoever wants to listen. My question to you is, why do you care about whether, like, why do you care? Like, just, would it keep you from doing the things that you love to do anyway? Like,
mm,
maybe it would tell you the topics that were really, really hot and that people really wanted to hear more about. I could see that
mm,
being a good reason. But, we I think that we care. This is going to sound awful. I think we care too much about
yeah,
what other people think of us. It's like, stop caring what other people think. Just do your thing.
yeah. No, and I mean, yeah, it's a good question, and you're so right. And I do tend to. I would imagine. I'm sure there is a mix, just like there is anyone on social media. I'm sure there are people who are really good at not getting involved, and I'm sure there are other people that look at them. I mean, you just got to look at how many big platforms still manage their own Instagram DMs. Uh, because I think this person's not going to reply to me. And then you'll find them on the end of it, and of course it must be so hard not to be checking it, because you're going to have whatever messages for, like, maybe the single and they've got girls messaging, or or opposite sex, so there's always going to be that pull, isn't there? And I
Yeah. No,
think
you're right. I mean, I think that it's a drug.
mm, and I think and it is mixed as well, because I use it for, podcast promotion, but it's also everything else. And I've got, my personal stuff on, I've got my friends on there. So everything is muddled up into, and sometimes I think to myself, I would much rather if I just put it out into the world and had no idea, you know, um, so that you were just working on the things that, because even you mentioned, like looking at what people like, what the audience like, but then you risk audience capture, and you end up just doing the things that people are
That's right.
reinforcing rather than the things that actually make you, want to do the work on. So it's yeah, I suppose I'm convincing myself that I need to do Instagram because I need the podcast to grow using Instagram. So then, but then it's very hard to not. What do they say? Use the app. Don't let the app use you. In theory, that's great, but harder to do unless you've got someone to manage it for you. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, no, but it's an interesting there's an interesting tug of war,
Mm,
in order to get out there and to, see if people are interested in the conversations you want to have and what you have to say and your experiences. You have to use the platforms, and but then it's like then you're kind of curious about the feedback. Well, is
mm,
it working? Because we're also very curious about, you know, is my message actually valuable? Because again, we want to be valued and we want to be valuable. So
mhm,
it's a hard. So I guess that, one of the things that I like to think about when I go on to the social media from time to time is, okay, like, how long are you going to be doing this? And I mean, my feeds are always tend to be like shopping stuff. Like, so someone's got my number, like, right? Someone knows she buys stuff that she sees. Um, and so, and then I have to realize, like, oh my God, like, it's been like 15 minutes just went by like that. And, it's 15 minutes I won't get back.
mm,
So it's, it's hard. It's definitely a hard thing, but I will say this. I do ask myself sometimes, why am I on here? What else could I be doing right now? And sometimes the answer is nothing. And I'm a
mm,
give myself all the time I want to do whatever I want right now. I just want to be kind of, brainless for a moment. Um, but then there are other times it's like, yep, that you're procrastinating or you're sad or something is happening. Put it down, go for a walk, just go clear your head a different way.
mm,
Go listen to a podcast, right? So
mm. Yeah, I think sadly, it's almost like, yeah, the thing that we're craving is connection, but what's happening is we're seeking out this other thing to fill that void that's actually making us worse. So it's a strange kind of relationship, that because I always think to myself, well, yeah, like I don't need it, but then what happens is I feel like, and obviously we live on different continents, so it's very with similar cultures, I would imagine, but I would imagine very different in the north of England versus where you are, and it's almost like our communities are more fragmented and siloed off than ever, probably because of social media and stuff. So sometimes it feels like, well, if you're not on there, then you're going to be cut off. Certainly where I live, it's quite a small town, and there's the moment it's dead. It's really dark. I don't know what is it. You'll be much more further south than me, so
yeah.
um, yeah, it's a funny one. It's
But there's a whole other kind of psychology that then jumps into the mix, and it's not a pretty one, which is kind of more of a coalitional psychology. So we also have systems that track who belongs to what coalition, and it would have been ancestrally really critical to track this information. Who's allied with who is against whom. And so understanding this would have allowed us to navigate the social world more effectively and, with greater longevity. And so
Mm.
we also have a thirst for this. And now, because social media isn't just hi, how are you? Like, where was your vacation? It was more of now it's more of a coalitional, it's a way to trigger kind of coalitional projects that people want to make sure that they first know what the project is and know what side they ought to be on, for instance, depending on whatever initial coalition they might belong to. Because you don't want to be the odd person out. You don't want to be the odd person out, not knowing what the beef is, what the conflict's about, because then
Mm.
you might be put in a position to have to make a snap judgment, and you don't want that to be the wrong one. So staying abreast of all the kind of coalitional gossip and what's going on and who hates who and for what reason and whether it was worth it and who says what. And so,
Mm.
I mean, like, come on, this is part of being human, is this interesting coalitional psychology. And social media is a place, again, where it takes off.
Yeah, it certainly does. What are the you have a lot of areas of research that you've worked in. What are the other sort of buckets that you've delved into?
Um, some of the other areas of research have been on emotions. So I've been interested in the emotion of gratitude. Normally, gratitude isn't an emotion that people talk about as one of the universal human emotions, but it's a universal system that evolved for the specific reason of identifying individuals who deliver benefits. So I mentioned earlier that friendships were really critical over evolutionary history. And the question is, what systems actually allow us to make a friend? Like, you can just say, yeah, we have friends, but then, okay, well, how would you engineer that in? So how would you program that into artificial intelligence or a robot in order to make a friend? What does that look like? And it ends up, gratitude might be one of the programs that's required for that. So gratitude deploys when someone delivers a benefit that was unexpected, right? So someone, at least, here in South, someone holds the door open for you. It's like, oh, unexpected, so thank you. But someone does even a minor kindness, and it's, the impulse is to say thank you for many people. What are you doing? So you're basically saying, hey, I detected that you delivered a benefit of some sort. And at least if it were in ancestral environments, it seems like, and I'd be inclined to deliver a benefit back, in the future, should the opportunity arise. Now, of course, today we don't interact with people repeatedly, but our circuits are not meant for today. They're meant for much more smaller hunter-gatherer bands. And so the idea that I noticed, hey, you did something very nice for me, you delivered a benefit, I'd be inclined to return that benefit later. And so the idea is that if you that's the potential then to snowball into a friendship, right? So you, upon hearing me say thank you look at me and say, I didn't mean to hold the door for you. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, we're not going to be friends, I guess. Right. Or if you say, oh, absolutely, happy to. Right. So that tells me that it was intentional, that you meant to deliver the benefit and so forth. So we're very sensitive to not only expressing the gratitude, but when we hear gratitude. And what we're really tracking through the language is reception of benefits. This isn't conscious by any sort of, by any means. But the idea is but that's
Depending
why
how
the system
autistic you are.
evolved. Yeah. Or how much of a bully you are, right? So
Mm.
in the sense that not everyone uses gratitude, right? So if I can get my way, without being grateful. I can just dominate and bully you and use anger instead, right? So gratitude and anger. So gratitude is really this kind of system that allows us to identify people who deliver benefits with the hope that maybe there is a potential cooperative relationship down the line. And so, but the other opposite kind of emotion is anger, right? So anger is when you detect someone has imposed a cost or not delivered a benefit, as sufficient as you expect. So you expect people to treat you a certain way, right? You come to each interaction, I expect, in my classroom when I'm a professor, or I'm standing at the head of the class, I expect to be treated a certain way. A student starts to pop off or talks back. It's like, this is, I wouldn't do that. And so the idea that anger tracks the kinds of actions that show another person has valued you less than you expected. And how much less actually translates into the level of anger. If it's only slightly less, then it's only a little bit of anger. If it's really less, then that kind of produces a big anger. But anger is a signal that that causes you to behave in a way with your facial expressions and your tone and your gestures, and you're puffing up like, I perceived what you just did to be of cost to me, or you didn't deliver a big enough benefit to me. Moving forward, I would value me more and I wouldn't impose such costs on me, or I'd deliver more benefits to me if I were you under threat of penalty. So that's
Mm.
basically what anger does. Now, again, people aren't thinking about that, but that's the evolutionary logic as to why this particular feeling of anger took hold and became part of our species' typical architecture, because it had the effect of changing the way people regarded us and valued us in the future. So that's one area. But people differ, like you mentioned, like bullies, people who are extremely narcissistic, psychopaths, like their gratitude, maybe they use it strategically, maybe not. But
Mm.
the idea that anger, right? So this kind of dominance kind of thing, like you should value me more. I'm the alpha male, I'm the alpha female, and so that's one way to go about it. That's typically short lived, especially when there's a coalition that can form against you. And so, but then there's the gratitude, the prestige kind of way of cultivating relationships through mutual value.
Mm. It's so interesting. It's almost like because you were talking about those it's like checks and balances or like a scorecard of I did this nice thing and then you do it back and then kind of and it's funny how I feel like although technology and social media and WhatsApp and stuff is kind of hijacking some of these things, but it also is like a kind of granular, very obvious demonstration of it working in practice. I was thinking about, chatting back and forth with my mate, and it's kind of just like a little compliment, little joke, and then it's just like we're back and forth over the net, and that's friendship. And seeing it on a chat thread is kind of very kind of yeah, it's just very obvious like what's going on there, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so funny. And one of those things I was wondering. So, what about any sort of strategies or any insights you've had around someone who is like looking to exploit us? You mentioned narcissism and so those some of those darker areas, like working out that difference in terms of exploitation versus like someone who is actually wanting to benefit us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that so one of the interesting questions that I've seen kicked around recently is to what extent are some of these dangerous personalities, to use uh, a book title from Joe Navarro, but these individuals who show some of these traits that are unpleasant to those of us receiving them, not to the ones giving them out. And so are these traits, the nature nurture debate, right? So how did all of this come about? And I've been trying to think about this. I mean, I don't have any exact answers, so please don't think that you're about to get a detailed answer. But here's how I think about it. And I apologize for how crazy this might sound or how far afield, but when you think about homosexuality and heterosexuality, I didn't have to learn how to be heterosexual. No one had to say, "Hey, Deb, come here." Like this is what you should really look for in a human, and these are the traits, and this is what you should accentuate in your own body and your own mind, and the kind of behaviors you should engage in. Like no one, someone's gonna out there say, "But your culture told you." Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't believe in that stuff because I think that we're bathed in this sea of information, and not all of it gets in. And so the question is, I must have a brain system that's grabbing certain pieces of information to do something with it. And so no one had to teach me that. And you talk to people who are gay and lesbian, trans, like no, I mean, they just that's who they are, right? So they know who they are, they know what they want to express in terms of the traits, they know what they feel like, they know what they're attracted to. And even despite laws against it, right? So people really understand what it means to feel a certain way. So, and not only that, I don't think that you could teach me to be, I mean, okay, that's going to be weird, but I mean, like, you could teach me to be a lesbian. Yes, I'm sure. And so, but it's like, and you could even like punish me and you could get me to do things, and you can get guys to do things that are kind of against their nature. But like, given the drugs, they'll snap right back to their nature, to their kind of inborn nature. And so when I think about who we are as people and our preferences, and then you think about people who are really nice and giving and altruistic, right? That's their nature. Could you get them to be mean? Could you turn them into something they're not? Yes, you could potentially, right? So under penalty, you can do quite a number of different things. Um, and I can give you an example from some research, but the other side of the coin is the bad people out there, the people who are exploiting and manipulative, that's their nature. Like, could you get them to be nice? Yeah, under penalty, under a lot of things, sure. Some of them, but that's their nature. That's who they are. That's the drum that's their drum beat. And so I just it's weird when it's not you. Like, thinking about it, listen, thinking about being a lesbian, it's not my cup of tea. That's not who I am. And for a lesbian, being heterosexual, that's not who she is, right? So it's like not her cup of tea. And so the idea is that we can we don't sometimes appreciate kind of the foreign preferences or preferences that might be foreign to us that are native to other people and natural to other people. And so one of the things that I've always been interested in, or I'm interested in more in now, is, the conversation about changeability of things. And so first, as an evolutionary psychologist, I'm curious about, well, what systems are we talking about, right? So first, what's the software we're talking about? How changeable is it? Like, I can't really easily change my PC into a Mac. Like, I can't. That takes rewiring and recoding and extra software patches and like a whole other craziness in order to get that to happen. And so, and I think that people are kind of walking around and looking at people who are like PCs and be like, you should be a Mac. You should be a Mac. And I'm, like, there's a Mac inside of you, I know.
Mm.
Let me just bring it out. And so I guess I'm more and more persuaded that people have very strong preferences and that a lot of who we are is there from the get-go. And so that's kind of where my science brings me to, is that, this kind of, I think people can change. I think people can grow. I think certain people want to change and grow. I think certain people do not want to change and grow. But that's an interesting question, and I think we'll learn a lot more as as science progresses and so forth, and as evolutionary psychology gets into maybe its teenage years. But it's an interesting question. Sorry, I totally went on a complete safari there, but I think it's an interesting question about who we are and how we come to have our preferences, and how changeable they are.
Mm. No, it's cool. No, I love it, and it's nice to hear something that you're passionate about. And I think just so we're clear, so are you talking, because you used the example of heterosexuality? Is this because there's this whole like woke thing that's going on at the moment, and I don't know. I'm trying to work if it's anti woke or pro woke. I can't work out the difference, if that makes sense. It's like this
Mhm.
double negative thing or whatever. So are you thinking, because there's this push at the moment against trans, etc., is what you're saying, that it's not a cultural thing in your estimation, and it is just a innate thing? Or just so I want to just get clear that
Oh,
up, that I've got that
do you
right.
mean do you mean the phenomenon of trans, like people who
Yes,
feel
yeah.
yes. So let me be very clear. I think it can be both, in the sense of, like, for
Mm,
instance, just to make sure that I think that some people who are heterosexual can say, I want to be valued over here and I want to try this and I want to, this is what I want to try. Right. So, and they're just kind of trying something to become more valued in a different area and region.
mhm,
Like, I think that there's reasons why people do things that are very much about being valued in their culture.
mhm,
And so that's one answer. I don't think that's the majority of things, however. I think that, first off, what I've come to learn is very few people understand how sexuality develops. I mean, just having chromosomes doesn't necessarily, having XX or XY doesn't push you into the male or female body plan automatically. A lot of other things have to happen. But then if you think of all the components of it, so I guess I'm going to answer your question quickly, which is yes, it's genetic. I mean, like, people who are trans they have I mean, there's a lot of ways to be trans, but for instance, you could have a male kind of internal and external genitalia, but the mind might not have been exposed to the early hormones that would have masculinized the brain, right? Causing a brain to be more feminine, right? So there are forms of testosterone that cross the blood-brain barrier, that help organize circuitry and so forth. And then during puberty, that activate a lot of systems. And so, to the extent that you have one set of genitalia, but your brain is kind of organized in a very male, female, depending on, in a female orientation, because male and female brains do differ, um, then you're going to feel like you're in a strange body, right? And so this is absolutely something that happens. So yes, so you could have people, so someone who looks male actually feel female, right? And
mm,
vice versa. So these are very much tied to developmental hormones, yes, genetics, but also how things are organized early on during sexual development and physiological development, but then activated during puberty. And so this is all really, really important to understand, to see how we get the buffet of sexualities, much like homosexuality, which is going to be tied to our, the biological development of our whole entire mate choice and sexual system, sexual psychology. So too is intersex. There's so many components. I mean, imagine having like the Chinese buffet, Chinese menu of sexual psychology. Pick one from column A, one from column B, one from column, like, the number of, different types of patterns that you can get when it comes to human sexuality is tremendous. Why are we seeing this more today? There's probably lots of reasons. Ancestrally, as hunter gatherers, our groups were small. Chances of seeing the variations arise in that set of systems to the extent that we see today would have been unlikely. But with more people, greater populations, right? You just have mutations that arise and stick around for a lot longer. And I don't mean mutations of mutants. I just mean variations
mhm.
and the way that people vary. And so all of it's natural. I mean, right? So it's all part of what it means to be human, and the natural variation you see That's in the sexual psychology. The other thing is, like, think about any other boring domain, like kidney size, liver function, and, heart, your O2 exchange at the lungs. Like, everything varies. So it is every trait is going to vary quite a lot. And, sexuality is no different.
Thank you. You described that beautifully. It was, and I've never heard anyone describe it that way. And yeah, I think it's really refreshing to, and what you said there about the hunter gatherer groups and the fact that there is just so many people now, and if it is a whatever 0.1% of the population or whatever that's deciding to be trans or whatever, but then you've also got that tyranny of the minority kind of thing that gets picked up by on social media, and then we see more of it, so we kind of think it's everywhere, and then that's why people think, well, this is ludicrous because but yeah, it's probably quite a small percentage, and it's just that, again, it's this mismatch of real life versus digital and the stuff that we see all the time, and it's quite
It's true. And
conflated.
then if you add on top of that the kind of additional psychology of we're always kind of looking for the low leveraged group to go after.
Mm,
So maybe that's a whole other conversation. But the idea of, we also are very, very attuned to groups in power and groups with less power. And you find some of the very interesting behavior in other primates like chimps, who will go around and patrol their borders, not for the safety, it is for the safety of the kind of the resident females and young and the territory and food, but they do it in order to basically, they have these lethal they basically make these lethal attacks on lone males and pick off members of outside groups so as to prevent other coalitions from becoming as strong and gaining greater leverage that would jeopardize their group's existence. So the idea that we kind of have this dark psychology, coalitional psychology of form a group, who's more leveraged, who's less leveraged, go after the less leveraged individual. I have to tell you, what was very interesting. I remember, I forget which election it was, but Oprah had a round table where she brought together, this was many, many years ago, but I've remembered this. She brought together a group of conservatives and liberals. One of the topics was, and this conservative said something that I'll never forget. He's basically like, oh, who cares if you're gay? Like, it doesn't really matter. But intersex. It was really funny. It was like, it became like, whatever. So what if you're gay? Everyone's gay. It doesn't matter anymore. But intersex, we should keep them out of the military. And so it was
mm.
just being like the new kid, lower leveraged on the block. It was just a very interesting comment about kind of the different, because for all, I mean, as soon as you see a Million Man March or, Ellen DeGeneres, when I was young, basically came out, on TV, the first kind of lesbian kiss on TV, and it caused such an uproar. But as soon as you start to see, oh, like there are actually a lot of people who have these kind of
Mm.
alternative lifestyles, and heterosexuality isn't only, ice cream flavor. And there's variation there as well. But the idea that there seems to be so many people who are gay or lesbian that, suddenly now that group has such great leverage, it's it seems psychologically like, well, why would you go after them? Like, but a lower leveraged, smaller coalition, that might be easier pickings. I don't think people are consciously thinking this. I just think that, something novel and new and a different kind of coalition who's fighting for rights and resources. I think that triggers our psychology to kind of put them on the map of, hey, hang on a second, here's another coalition. What's going on? What's their leverage and so forth? And that puts them in the spotlight. Anyway, I found that really interesting that it's just like, so what? Who cares if you're gay?
Mm. Yeah, and yeah, you can imagine whatever 50, 60 years ago, it was homophobia was the thing, And then
Yep.
now it's transphobia, but it's like, but like you say, yeah, but we've got no problem with the gays. It's now now the transsexuals that we've got an issue with, or whatever. And yeah, that's interesting. Interesting. I know this isn't necessarily a direct area of research, but one of the things I'm interested around is, you mentioned how the brain develops different hormones and stuff, different interactions, masculinity, etc. What about siblings, in terms of, if you grow up with an older sister versus growing up with two older brothers, and what effect that has on the brain's development? Have you looked into anything like that before?
No, that's not an area that I know very much about. I mean, I think it's super interesting. Um, but no, I don't know much about that area. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. What about disgust?
And on a high note. So disgust is a fun emotion, and I there's been a lot of work on disgust. So starting, not starting with Darwin, but at least, picking up with Darwin, he mentioned the emotion of disgust as an interesting emotion that prevents contact with things that are contaminated and dangerous. And then the work of Paul Rosen and Jonathan Haidt, um, and Paul Ekman on the facial expression. From an evolutionary perspective, I have thought about disgust as functioning and a solution to three different problems we would have faced in our kind of ancestral past. The first problem was what to eat. So you're a hunter gatherer. You're going out to search for food. Typically, you want things that are going to help us, help build and repair cells, not break them down and cause greater, entropy. And so, staying away from disease-causing organisms, so bacteria and viruses and bugs and parasites and all those sorts of things, and it ends up that bacteria leave a hallmark, so they can become sour. So some of their byproducts cause release hydrogen ions, and so we detect that as a sour kind of taste. And so we're very sensitive to bacterial presence, and so typically find that disgusting. We also tend to find disgusting and what and the kinds of things that would have harbored bacteria are like blood, guts, gore, kind of living bodies. And so ensuring that we didn't come into contact with those kinds of harmful materials would have been really important. Plants have secondary compounds that are primarily important to plants, that are important for helping them fight off their disease causing organisms, because plants can also be attacked by bacteria and other kinds of parasites. And so they produce these secondary compounds. They can be dangerous to us and affect the functioning of neurons and so forth and development. And so we taste them as bitter. And so we kind of steer clear of bitterness. One side of disgust is when we think about what to consume, we assess the qualities of food, and if we assess that it is something that's harmful, that triggers disgust, avoidance, repulsion. If we determine that it's actually not disgusting, it's actually beneficial and yummy, that's kind of the appetitive, okay, scrumptious, please eat me kind of thing. That's one form of disgust or food avoidance. And for food psychology, related to that is contact. So disgust also prevents us from touching things that would have contracted disease-causing organisms like bacteria. So, the 3-second rule, the idea that something hits the floor, it's not enough to actually, I don't know that that's ever actually been tested. That'd be fascinating in terms of the psychology of drop it, it hasn't been down long enough to stick to anything. But in any case, so contact, so staying clear of the things that could have made you sick. And then the last domain or last function of disgust seems to be part of our sexual psychology. So disgust evolved to regulate who to avoid as sexual partners. And so the idea that individuals who do not hit the bullseye of your mating psychology and the things that you find highly sexually attractive are typically going to activate disgust. So sex with close family members. So can't avoid the topic. So talking about inbreeding avoidance, other animals also, and actually plants for that matter, avoid mating either with themselves or with close genetic relatives. And the reason for that is the variation. So sexual reproduction is a process that evolved to introduce variation into the next generation. That variation put disease-causing organisms back at square one. So if I'm a bacteria, I'm a virus, I'm a parasite, and I'm living inside of you, right? The best thing for me is if you to clone yourself, right? Clone yourself. And so I have a whole nother generation to figure out, how to pick the locks of your, all your organs and get away and evade your immune system and so forth. And so clones typically don't live for a very long time. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Dolly the sheep, but one of the very first cloned animals, so it was around for a while, had to live in a clean room because of this susceptibility to disease, but it didn't live very long. And so sexual reproduction evolved to introduce this variation in offspring to thwart the effects of kind of bacteria and disease-causing organisms. I mean, something that none of us really know, we just have sex. And so that the reason why we typically don't enjoy and seek out close family members to have sex is because mating with a close genetic relative actually is more close to and more similar to cloning, right? Because if you're already mating with someone who has the very same kind of similar biochemistry as you and same genetics, that's almost the same as cloning yourself. And that gives a leg up to any bacteria and other parasites that are passed down. And so we have a very, very strong psychology, detect our kin, but then also avoid them, have an intense aversion that develops as a function of our ability to assess another person's relatedness. So disgust keeps us and steers us clear from sexual partners that would have jeopardized the health of offspring in future generations. So those three areas, food, contact, and sex, are the functions of disgust. So you got the whole mini lecture right there.
Are there any dangers of that aversion that we feel that we should watch out for?
Yes. Well, so disgust. So if you notice, I didn't say anything about morality. And typically when people talk about disgust, usually they say, what kinds of things disgust you? And then like typically on that list are like politicians and things like this. And so where does morality come into play here? And where does this moral disgust that we feel, how does that happen? And I would say it is using the disgust that we personally feel towards things in our world, foods, things to touch, and sex and sexual partners, that we then use as information about what kinds of individuals would be less costly to form coalitions against. So, I love my family members, I love my friends. I'm not going to get disgusted by people who benefit me, like who I have good relationships with. Like, those are not the people to go after. The people to go after are the people who cause harm, who impose costs. And so each group of people is going to have a different group of people that they perceive to impose costs. And so you put this alongside our coalitional psychology that's always sifting for, what groups are out there competing for resources, who are the lower powered, lower leveraged groups that maybe I can pick off to kind of eliminate from this competition. And this is typically kind of male coalitional sorts of thinking. The idea that you then kind of can examine one's, you can examine lots of things, but one emotion that readily provides information about value is disgust, in the sense of, if I find something disgusting, that's of low value, right? So people who are really dirty, smelly, and diseased, that's low value, right? So that's people who are going to impose potential costs. People who are healthy, attractive, and, otherwise beneficial, those are not disgusting. And so we use disgust as one set of inputs into a system that is who can I get a coalition against? You look at some cultures, they have the untouchables. So India has literally the untouchables. We talk about contact disgust, right? So a whole cast of individuals who are relegated as not worth engaging in and touching and contacting. And so disgust is used in that in a socio-moral way to make divisions in who gets resources and who does not. And so disgust can very much be used in that moral way. So in America, we just had the Super Bowl. And I don't know if that's something that you watched. It's the wrong kind of football, I know.
Yeah.
But so
they're trying to do it as a bit of a Christmas Day thing. It's becoming a bit of a trend, but it's very new to us.
I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So,
Yeah.
so stick with what you know. So, but the point is, one of the commercials, so typically in Super Bowl, one of the things that Americans like to do is to look at all the commercials. But one of the commercials that stuck out to me, I was this really disgusting commercial about like the color of your pee, right? So to see whether you're hydrated or not. And it was fascinating. And so tomorrow in my lecture, it's one of the questions I'm going to ask the students is, what commercial do you remember from the Super Bowl? I'm just curious whether the disgusting one. It was a popular song from the 80s that they pulled out that was over it, but it had all these toilet bowls, talking and flapping. And it's like, oof, like this is like a really gross commercial. And it was a little weird until you realized it was about, you got to take a look at what color your urine is to make sure you're properly hydrated. And so, but it's like,
So was
the
it
one
for
commercial.
an electrolyte product, or was it like yeah?
Yeah,
Interesting.
exactly. So, that company's going to hate me because I don't remember. Wait, Liquid IV. Sorry. See, I do remember.
Okay.
So disgust works. And so here's a more serious question. To what extent should disgust be used in the law? If disgust is used for personal preferences, but we now know it can be used at this kind of coalitional group level to target and leverage the power of more numerous and more higher leverage groups against the lower leveraged. Like, should we be using disgust as our compass, as our legal compass? And I don't know the answer to that. I know what I think. I don't think disgust should be in the law. I think that we should have other guiding principles. But
Could you give me
some
some examples of where it has been used in the law?
laws against homosexuality,
Mm.
certain food restriction laws. So disgust as it comes to consumption. I don't know whether it's I don't know whether it's tied to this, but drugs, plants tend to be bitter and cause disgust. And so,
Mm-hmm.
so marijuana, I don't know that it's an accident that it's a plant that's bitter. So if the rich people and people in power, if that was only allowed to be done by them, like opium in the past, then maybe it wouldn't have been targeted, but it's conveniently targeting a bunch of, non-leveraged, high leveraged people. So anyway, it's interesting. So I think that what people eat, who and what they touch, and who people have sex with are ways that disgust ends up in our law.
Mm.
And the question is, should that be the case? I don't know. I leave that for people far smarter than I. So, but it is a question. Mating preferences are super interesting in the sense of how picky we all are.
Mm.
Not anyone will do. And
More picky than ever as well now.
exactly. So the idea is I to my eyeballs, there are millions of possible candidates, right? So I can actually wait and sift for the exact right one. And so, no, mating in the modern world is certainly an interesting, experience, especially when it gets to all the dating apps. which for some people works out quite well, but it's not without its problems and risks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, I think that here's a question for you. Well, here's a question that I've been interested in, which is how is it that our template for what we find to be attractive, how does that get formed? Right? So the idea that everyone has their kind, their type, what they're really looking for. What is that all about? And so one of the things that I have been thinking about early on in development, when you're coming into this world, you would have been surrounded by a lot of kin, right? So you have a really good set of examples of what healthy individuals who've been able to survive look like, right? So this is what men look like in my culture. This is what men tend to do. This is what women look like in my culture. This is what women tend to do. And so think about this more in an ancestral environment. And then you can think about it today. But first think about it in an ancestral environment that you're like, okay, this is what men do, this is boys do, and this is how they learn, and this is what they're trained to do, and this is what I see females doing, and so forth. So you get these kind of templates about same and opposite sex. And then it comes to, okay, so puberty, and then you're ready to actually find a mate. The people you find most attractive are going to be more like the kinds of things that
You
formed
grew
your
up with.
template.
Basically,
Exactly.
fancy appearance.
But not in the Freudian sense. I was trying not to say that. And so because the Freudian thing is not true at all. But I'm trying to say that you could also admire and like the qualities of one's parents and find them attractive in another individual and still have no attraction to your parents, right? But I think that's probably, so that's my question is, because I've always been, people are like, oh, Deb, I've got a great guy to, fix you up with. He's great. And then you look and you're like, oh, I don't really know. Oh. So, but if only, right? If only it were that flexible. So
it's almost like I suppose it's an interesting one, isn't it? When you think about, and it's obviously, it's like mating is different from dating, without it sounding cheesy, or mating is different from marriage, of course. So it's like the things that we are attracted to, evolutionarily speaking, aren't necessarily the things that are going to make us healthy and happy and successful marriage, right?
Oh my God. I mean, like, if I had, so I try, remember, I teach undergraduates. And so when possible, I try to provide like you don't really have to listen to what I'm saying, but I'm going to tell you something that you might want to tuck away. And I just try to tell them now, like, nice, someone who's kind and intelligent and passionate about what they want to do. Like, like I understand, like for females, they're interested in resources and, females the world round want a male who's capable of taking care of them, right? And investing in her and her offspring. And this is not uncommon. This is not unique to humans. This is that,
even if they
part
say
of
they don't. Most of the
yes,
time.
because again, imagine the person who says, the person who says it, right? So plausible deniability, the idea of, so what's, why did you find me attractive? Oh, your car. Like that ends pretty quickly. So it's like, it's very interesting. It's like this kind of dance that we have to do in terms of, I can't be exactly honest as to why. I mean, that'd be a very interesting world, being 100% honest about everything. I think language has a very interesting feature in that it allows us to misdirect and to get people to, I value you for, I value you for the unique attributes that you bring to the table, not like, yeah, you'll be able to feed me. Like, and so, but the ability to feed me was actually correlated with these other features that I would have found attractive ancestrally. So, the idea of being, having musculature and being able to have a prowess and intelligence, social intelligence, but also kind of spatial intelligence and kind of understand hunting and coalitions and so forth. Being a kind person, the things that would have correlated with, getting me a nice car, or taking me out to a nice dinner today would have correlated with the things that ancestrally would have given me the food, right? So a man who was, physically capable of not only going out and getting food, but also protecting it, protecting me, protecting offspring, and ensuring that he had good alliances and wasn't making social enemies unnecessarily and so forth. And so
Mm.
I think that
So they're proxy.
they're proxies. But today they're completely divorced, right? They're completely,
Yeah.
you can have one without the other. And so I think females are a little bit like, wait, what's going on? I see the things, but they're not the things. And so, so I think that there's some interesting aspects in our modern world that could hamper good decision making.
Yeah. It's a couple of things on that I was thinking. So like, firstly, just a funny comment, because I've sometimes debated this with my stepmom regarding my dad. Around, and I'm like, yeah, and she's like, oh, I'd be with him if he was like we call him bin men, like a garbage guy, like, and I'm like, I'm like, you might think that, but I'm like, but it's also coincidental and convenient that he had a good career and all the rest of it, and he happens to be a great guy, and and it's like no one will admit it, and then you look at it the other way around, it's like, when a woman will say, oh, what do you like about me? And the guy's like, your personality. And they basically want to say, well, I think you're hot,
Yeah.
but they'll get in trouble for that.
Not as much as you might think. And so, but here is the thing. So you talk about your stepmom and your dad, just as an example here. I think that women do often say those kinds of things, because I think that what they are identifying is the fact that you have the skill sets that even if you're a bin man, even if you were selling pencils on a corner, you have the set of skills and the kind of personality that I know that would be your starting point, and you wouldn't end there. That's just where you would, that I think that you would make it do, you would improve, and you would grow. And so I think that what women are looking for is that ambition and that drive, right? So, and I think that even if you're set back, and I think that women say that, like, even if you had a setback, even if you lost it all, I'd still love you. And because I know that if you lose it all, you're not just going to sit on the couch with your thumb up your ass, right? Playing video
Yeah.
games, that you're going to like think about, how do I improve my situation? How do I make the next move? And so I think that women are very finely tuned to all of that. So that's not an insult. I do think women are, when they say those kinds of things, they are saying something that I don't think translates to men's ears as much, because I don't think men understand that that women are oftentimes very interested in ambition, go-getterness kind of thing, and drive and grit. And I think that that's what oftentimes what we're putting our finger on. Now, for men, when they say you're hot, I think that's the beginning and end of the story. Not
Well,
really, but
yeah, I mean, they're obviously, yeah, they're more or less. I mean, mine, to be honest, mine is, you're hot, you're not a dickhead, and you would like kids. That'll do.
you forgot one, and she's smart.
Yes, yeah. Of course, but that's quite a set of features, which is hard to find.
No, so but it is quite interesting about how those preferences come about, because you can list all of the things we were just talking about, and there's been tons of surveys and tons of research on what people prefer, but the labels are few, like, two hands, fingers, toes, like, but then
Mhm.
how they are actually represented and instantiated out in the world, it's not like I can give you, like, if you rate, a certain set of qualities, 8, 8, 7, 7, 2, 4, whatever, and then I'm like, oh, I found your 8, 8, 7, 7. Like, I found someone who, like, is exactly that. And you'd be like, I could find 100 people exactly like that, and you'd be like, no to all of them, right? So there's an additional kind of chemistry and mixture. And
Mm.
it's not, but that's got to be something programmed in there. That's got to be something that's being assessed and something that's influencing your motivations and your preferences. And I'm always very curious about what that is.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I've dated a lot of girls where I've been like, like all the things are there on paper, right? And I'm trying to use my brain to be like, okay, let's stick it out, because like tick, 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 tick. But then like sometimes there is just that, like, yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
like,
that's
nope.
like chemistry, or there's something there that
Like
something that
that,
isn't there.
it makes a good friend, so
Mm,
there is a definite kind of a highly valuable human, that you really like, you really think a lot of, um uh just like maybe a same-sex friend kind of thing, a guy friend, it's just like, but we're just really not, I'm not attracted to you.
mm.
And so it is very interesting. But how we pick our friends and how we pick our mates, I think those are two interesting topics. And just to kind of loop it back all to evolutionary psychology, somewhere in the mind, there's programs that evolve to guide all of that. And we're really just starting to learn about what that information processing circuitry, is all about.
Yeah. Deborah, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time. Is there anything that we've not covered today? Anything that you wanted to talk about? Anything that you're currently obsessed with that you would like to chat about?
Well, that's a whole other podcast. Now, let's see. Um, if if you want to learn a little bit more, I have a new website that's Lieberman Labs, and then I am working on a textbook for the field that
Mhm.
incorporates a little bit more of this kind of information processing that I've been talking about and social value. That's a little bit different than past textbooks. And so that's really kind of where my focus is right now.
Fantastic. And you mentioned, is it Liebermanlabs.com? Did you?
Mhm.
And anywhere else, where should people go if they want to check out your work?
Um, Google.
Google.
So actually, no. In all seriousness, so Google, yes, but also Center for Evolutionary Psychology,
Uh-huh.
which is which is a list of publications. And if anyone's interested in the field in general, there's some great papers there, and certainly many of mine are there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. This is yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed listening to all your insights and stuff, and so appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day. Hey guys, it's me. Just a quick one before you get going. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Don't forget, you can check out links to my guests via the episode description below. And a reminder to claim your free VIP pass month at InDeep. Go to indeep.com/podcast. That's INDIIP.com/podcast. If you're looking to improve your life and build habits, I really think you're going to love this tool. All links are in the episode description. Thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.